Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders podcast. I'm your host, Addison. For many of us, the beginning of our bonsai journey is the most confusing part. It's a time of information overload, analysis paralysis, and the fear of killing our first tree. But does it have to be that difficult? Today's guest isn't a seasoned professional with decades of experience, he's one of us. Nick started his bonsai journey last year and has become fully committed, learning at a breakneck pace. We had our club show this last month, and he was able to put together a beautiful tokonoma-style display within his first year, which I thought was ultra impressive and speaks to the speed at which he's been able to get started in this hobby. We're going to dive into what he's been doing to see what it takes to build a strong foundation at the start of your journey. Nick, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Do you want to maybe introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Addison. I'm incredibly appreciative and a little bit honored to ask to share my perspective. I'm glad that we're focusing more on what it looks like to learn bonsai and less on what I've actually learned. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, actually, maybe we could start with, do you want to take me through the display that you crafted for the show? I think it would be interesting for folks to hear about that. And you definitely are an anomaly in a good way in terms of, for me, for example, I think it was maybe 4 years in before I showed my first tree. And to do a compelling, multi-part display in your first year speaks to your dedication to the hobby. So I wanted to hear a little bit about what that display was for the audience, as well as kind of the motivation behind it and how you felt about doing that in your first show, or even maybe why you thought it was important to do in the first show.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the display creation has been one of the more fun parts of the bonsai experience, like in the first year. And I think it's part of what I really want to achieve in bonsai, like as far as my goals. Being able to create a display that is like as an experience, a viewing experience for like people just passing by, creating a display that is compelling, that is evocative of some feeling, is really interesting to me. That is one of the things that I really want to be able to do and do better over time is, have these displays that communicate ideas. And, I want those ideas to go a little bit beyond just like the beauty of nature. I mean, ultimately, I don't know that that's really necessary. Like there's so much that's compelling about, trees and trees in nature and the beauty of like ancient and old trees and what it looks like to just observe them and like be taken into a time and a place that makes you feel like you're actually looking at this like really majestic and like wonderful living thing. So going beyond that, part of me is like, okay, do I even have to? But it's really interesting to think about, what could we do with that opportunity? And with my show display this year, I displayed a bougainvillea, and I wanted to go a little bit past the tree in nature to connect to just like my sense of like love and family. And the bougainvillea was a tree that my grandma always commented on when she drove us to school. So growing up, it was like a really like just specific memory I had of her and of like being taken to school, and she was like such a loving and caring person, like such a powerful influence on me and my upbringing. And I wanted to try to bring this sense of connection to my childhood and my family into the display. So that's what I was going for. Ultimately, there's a few ways I tried to tie all that together. So one was the plant, which I selected just based on that connection. And on top of that, I had a scroll included in the display, and the scroll was a rendering of the street that my grandma would drive us down that would always like inspire her comments about the bougainvilleas that were growing there. They were massive, and we grew up in Florida, so like they're in flower all the time and really pronounced colors. And so I went onto Google Maps and I went through like the archives of photos you can get, and I went back to like 2007. I found a shot of this street, of this house that had the flowers, that had the bougainvilleas growing there. So I rendered that as a Japanese style scroll, and I printed it out, and I had it, I had my wife help me put it onto a scroll that I got online, and that was a big part of the display as well. And then the stand, I felt like was maybe another opportunity to really like execute on this opportunity for putting my own idea into the display. And so I connected with another member of our club, Jeff, and I told him that I want to create a stand, and I want the stand to connect to this idea of seeing bougainvilleas in the urban landscape. And it's a little bit unusual because we're always trying to go out into nature and inspire the themes of the natural landscape of the plant. And I felt like there was a little bit of tension in trying to evoke not the natural landscape of where bougainvilleas actually grow, but to evoke this place that we all see bougainvilleas, which is driving around and growing up terraces and growing up trellises. And so anyways, I connected with Jeff, and I told him I want to make this stand that looks like a trellis. And, it's going to have a base, and it's going to have a top shelf, and then the part that connects the top shelf where the plant sits and the base where the stand rests on the table is going to be a trellis. And Jeff has an incredible sort of woodworking workshop and basically made the stand for me, which was really awesome. He was super willing to like give of his time and his knowledge and help me put the stand together. That was the other part of the display that sort of connected all of these ideas that I was mulling over. And, I kind of toyed with the question of like, how effective is this? Like, are people really like getting it? But I got a lot of really, really great feedback from the club and the folks in the show. And, whether or not it was 100% successful, I think it was a really, really great exercise and really encouraging in terms of how much I want to focus on the ability to think about things that are important to me beyond just the usual themes of like a bonsai display, and how we can try to incorporate that in what I'm doing with my sort of bonsai pursuits.
Yeah. Wow. Just the fact that you could go that deeply into the intentionality of the display as a year into bonsai, I think definitely speaks to the passion. There's a lot of interesting things in there. I think let's maybe start with, take us a step back to how did you get interested in bonsai and how long have you been into this pursuit?
I have had like a Malzai, like a very unimpressive like mall bought bonsai tree growing in my house for years, and I've enjoyed just keeping that plant alive. Is a Carmona, and it would flower on occasion and throw some fruit on occasion. But I didn't really get into bonsai until last summer, when I had a redwood tree that my wife bought me because she knows like I love redwood trees and they're all over the place and I always comment on them, and so she bought me one. She ordered this little sapling online and it's like this 2-year-old stick, and I've just been growing it in pots, and it's been traveling with me from our old apartment to our new house. And I was looking at it, and it's just kind of a random sort of curiosity of like, here's this redwood tree that's growing in a pot. It's probably going to outgrow this pot. Like, what should I do with it? Could I make it into a bonsai? And this thought struck me like in the middle of last summer, so like July of last year. And it sort of sent me down this rabbit hole that I feel like kind of changed my life, honestly. I mean, I've just found so much enthusiasm and engagement in bonsai that, thinking back to how it all got started with just like a random Google search of like, can you make a redwood tree into a bonsai? And I started looking into this. I started finding like some stuff online, communities, and I'm like, oh my God, the East Bay Bonsai Society. I found the club website, and then I found the bonsai garden at Lake Merritt, and I'm like, oh my God, there's a bonsai garden like right down the street. And one thing led to another. I joined the club. I joined the club in August. The club show was happening pretty soon after that. I started buying trees. The Pacific Bonsai Expo was happening soon after that in October. And that's where I really got sent into this like, incredible like feeling of how powerful bonsai can be, and how moving it was for me personally to just like walk through the PBE. I volunteered for the PBE and like help with the organization of the show. I was looking at the list of volunteer opportunities, and there was like load stuff here, load stuff here, load stuff here. Help the photographer take pictures of every single tree in the show. And I was like, boom, yes, that's the volunteer opportunity that I would like. And so I signed up to help with the photography on the first day, and it's just going to continue to snowball from there. But how it got started is just a somewhat sort of random curiosity of having a tree in my yard that was growing in a pot, and asking myself, like, could this be a bonsai? I don't know.
That's really interesting. It seems like a lot of your practice is oriented around display and the expression of specific family or things within your life within display. Like, how does display rank in terms of your goals? And then How did that come about?
I think it started when I came across certain photos, images, pictures that I felt like were trying to convey ideas that were a little bit more artistic, I will say. The Pacific Bonsai Expo had a few exhibits that were kind of like that. Michael Hagedorn's exhibit at the PBE like really stood out to me as like kind of thought provoking, and that really resonated with me. And then there was another exhibit at the PBE, which was the project of the collaboration between, I think, Ryan Neal with the Pacific Bonsai Museum. I forget what it was called, but it was this project of like a research project of bonsai that they had this crazy tree. I mean, the tree was incredible. The deadwood was just literally like going all over the place, and I saw that tree and I was like, okay, what are they trying to tell me? And those were some of the initial, I think, experiences where I started to connect with the opportunity to have this be a pursuit that could include a lot of creative expression. I will say I've searched for an outlet of creative expression for a long time, and going back to high school, I tried all kinds of things, to be honest. I tried to learn guitar in college. I played a lot with songwriting. I tried all the creative writing. I tried these different sort of creative pursuits that would like give me an opportunity to express ideas I have about the world and society and like the human condition and what life is all about. You know, I have all these ideas and I've really struggled to like find a creative way to express them and get good at that and get good at that creative medium. Like with all the things I just mentioned, I always felt like I was never really able to evolve my skills and progress in terms of like becoming having my skill like really equate to the complexity of the ideas that I felt like I wanted to explore. So I felt kind of stymied in a lot of those pursuits, and I didn't really do a ton of like super like creative exploration personally like in the past few years. Like to be honest, like there was a lot I played with in college and graduating from college, and then I really just couldn't find the right artistic medium. Just focused on my professional life, my family life, and then like I found bonsai last year, and it only took me like a few months to really connect. And I don't think this happened very actively. I mean, ultimately this was something that I feel like was happening a little bit subconsciously. Was like I was getting into bonsai and I was starting to connect with the displays and find that like looking at these trees was really quite moving and super compelling. And then one of the displays that really like the first time I saw it, I was like, my jaw dropped. Like, oh my God, was Michael Hagedorn's display in the Artisans Cup, which like I kind of stumbled onto this website where you can go and see all of the displays from the Artisans Cup in like incredible high resolution. And I found Michael Hagedorn's display of this vine maple that was growing like what looked like on a like a rock face on like it was this like moss covered platform, and the maple was just growing off to the side and extending like endlessly out over this like just lush and vibrant sort of landscape scene. And I was like, this is so unconventional. This is very different from most of what I'd seen up until this point. And just the creativity and like what the tree was planted on, and in terms of the overall thoughtfulness of the display, and then listening to the judges' critiques of the display and everybody talking about how awesome it was and how it wasn't really going to like score super high in the show, but that it was still just super creative and super awesome. All that was super compelling, and I think like something was just happening in my mind where I was starting to really connect with the opportunity to use bonsai as a sort of creative outlet that I had been searching for a long time.
It's very interesting. I've got friends who like Brock and Aaron Packard and people who really focus on I don't know, maybe I would describe it as like the art aspect of bonsai, right? Conveying some sort of message or emotion through the trees and the displays. And then there's a lot of people who focus on like the technique aspect of it, or like just want to represent nature, for example, right? But it seems like you're definitely more on that front of you see bonsai and display as a medium to convey a higher message. But I'm curious, like, does traditional bonsai display frustrate you at all then? Because I don't think traditionally that's it's a very rigid, like you do showcase context through a bonsai display, but I don't know that there's always traditionally like a message behind the display or behind the tree, right? And also, you almost have to display that kind of emotion, you almost have to have multiple components, right? Not just the tree. So yeah, I'm curious if that has frustrated you all at all, or you're just excited about having that outlet. The other thing you mentioned is like Michael Hagedorn's display. I remember that display. I don't how it scored or something like that, but I imagine it didn't win its category, right? Being something more outside of the traditional mold. So there aren't a lot of actually opportunities, I feel like, in bonsai to showcase that type of art-focused bonsai and have it appreciated. So we'd love your thoughts on that. And like that seems like something you're very, very excited about. So I'm curious how that meshes with the current state of bonsai, or how you think of it.
I don't find that, I find traditional bonsai or bonsai that lacks creative expression that is like observable to me, or that I can like discern just by looking at it, like that's not frustrating. That's still, I think, an incredible opportunity to create something super compelling, super engaging, just within the confines of creating a miniature tree that achieves the right proportions to make you feel like you're standing in a wild place, and connecting with the tree, and with the environment that it's evoking. That can be incredibly compelling. So I find that consuming bonsai content is still super fun for me, even when it doesn't have that component. And I find myself looking through books, and looking at like social media for inspiration. It's very engaging. So I think the opportunity for like super creative displays, and themes, and exploration of concepts and ideas in bonsai is just an opportunity to take that further, and engage in a way that I relate to even more strongly. But I certainly find certain kinds of bonsai more compelling for me personally. I find that displays that attempt to explore trees that look beautiful, trees that look elegant, trees that have incredible flow are more compelling for me personally, relative to trees that look powerful and ancient, and withered, and having undergone some incredible struggle. That's certainly compelling, but less so for me. I really want to find sort of beauty and elegance, and color and vibrancy in the trees that I like the most in bonsai, which is, I think, not exactly what a lot of people are aiming for. And so I'm curious, sort of, what's your reaction to that? Because I think like powerful trees, and old trees, and trees that have struggled mightily and that look very ancient is a very popular sort of like aesthetic to pursue. But for me, like it's really the deciduous trees, and the elegant trees that I really connect with right off the bat.
Well, it's been a treat to kind of listen to you explaining your point of view, because it's a point of view that is very different than, I guess, my influence in bonsai. For me, bonsai was like, I grew up with this, like even before I knew about bonsai, I grew up with this like fascination and respect for seeing that small tree out in the national park, like clinging to the side of a rock face. Like that always fascinated me. And seeing those kind of tortured, gnarly conifers out in nature was, and then I found out you could have those at home. That was what initially drew me to bonsai, like having that piece of nature, that view, that feeling whenever you see that tree with that interesting shape out in nature, stuck in between granite slabs. So to hear you talk about your approach and like your inspiration is really cool, because it kind of opens my brain up a little bit about what's possible, and like the different ways to appreciate the art. So I know it's not a direct answer, but so, I mean, for you to even talk about some of these ideas like flow and color and advanced concepts of design, clearly you've spent a lot of time like researching bonsai. So I would love to know, that's probably attributes a lot to like what's made you successful so far and what will make you successful. But I'm curious if you could outline a little bit, like, where have you been, like, how did you even know to find the Artisan's Cup website from, however many years ago? And what are you doing in your practice to A, like learn about how you can express yourself through bonsai, and then B, learn about actually taking care of the bonsai trees? Like, what have your steps been in this first kind of year and a half?
It's a great question, and ultimately a challenging experience to have like gone through. I mean, obviously it's a hobby, it's fun, so not challenging in terms of like real adversity, but challenging just in terms of the quantity of information that's available, and the usual channels that I would go to is just like start on on Google and do the web search, and then look for some forums and some places where like people that are a part of this community gather online, and learn and use that as a sort of jumping off point to learn. But I found a lot of information that ultimately led me astray in going that route. So like in
Oh,
forums.
interesting. Can you give us some examples of that?
Well, a lot of times, so, okay, one example was that I had a lot of ants on one of my trees early on, like, last fall. Ants were like crawling all through the soil. And I just started going online and searching, like, what do I do about ants in my trees? Is it good? Is it bad? And yeah, like I found some forum posts saying, like, dunk the tree in a bath of water for 30 minutes and the ants will like become flooded and leave. And so I just tried that, and it was fine, but it was not fine because the tree was very stressed out. It was recently worked on heavily, and it was suffering from Nick's overcare and Nick's overlove. So basically, I had been overwatering the tree without realizing it for quite some time. It was a boulevard cypress, a saguaro cypress that I like was just like looking online. How do I care for this tree? And I said, well, keep it well watered, like water it well. And so I was just watering it like every day. And it was just at a point where I didn't really understand like how to, like read soil and understand the water needs of the tree. And so I've been watering the tree every day. I took it to a bring your own tree styling workshop, and in that workshop, with some help, we nuked the tree. Like we did, like pruned off 80% of the foliage. We ginned a bunch of stuff. We cut it back super hard, and we made it into like a nice upright form from what had been a super bushy, super vigorous and overgrown tree that was in like a nursery can. And so we styled it super heavily. We reduced like 80% of the foliage. I had been overwatering it a ton. And then the ants started crawling through it, and they were like, okay, put the tree in the water bath for 30 minutes. And the root rot just really exploded after that, and the tree like declined to a very sad state. It's not so much like the specific anecdote, but just this idea that you have some issue or some question, and you go online and you find somebody that's talking about one potential like remedy, but without the context of what's their location and what's the time of year that might happen to them, and is it the same time of year that this might be happening to you, and what's the level of health and vigor of the tree. All of that is just so important, right? And so like my tree having been styled like a little bit prematurely and overly aggressively and been overwatered for weeks, and then leading up to this issue where I'm just like dunking it in this water bath and like zero opportunity to let it dry out, and I lost that tree. I think like over reliance on the internet to just like solve my problems was a big like early hang up for me.
Makes sense. Yeah, there's so many variables in bonsai that it can be difficult to, even if somebody posts a picture of a snapshot in time, it's difficult to understand what can actually be the issue. And the tree doesn't necessarily tell you directly either, right? Yellowing leaves, and then that could be 4 different things or whatever, right? That
Yeah,
makes
and
sense. So
it's
did
the
you?
lack of
How did you
understanding.
evolve? How did you evolve beyond that then, or like, where did you go for information after you felt that maybe internet was slightly unhelpful or untrustworthy?
Yeah, so I mean, I started off like, looking through forums and watching YouTube content that was very targeted to like, beginners, but I feel like I didn't really take a step forward in understanding enough about bonsai to make informed decisions about what to consume. I really took a step forward when I came across the BSOP Fundamentals YouTube series, and a series of presentations, which is done by Ryan Neal, that walk through what it looks like to do bonsai in every season, right? And so the BSOP Fundamental series for spring, summer, fall, and winter. And I just watched like each 2 hour session of what the kinds of like work that you would be doing in each of those seasons. I mean, that's really when the concept of energy management was introduced to me, and when the concepts of the plant as a system that requires you really like understand and balance its health, its vigor, its seasonality, its maturity as a tree over many years, balanced with its its vigor over the course of that particular growing season. Like putting all of that context together is so critical if you're going to take any piece of information from the internet and apply it to your own garden. And it was really that BSOP Fundamentals like YouTube series. There's a ton of videos. It's not just the seasonal fundamentals, but there's more in there. That was what really started to help me have a grounded approach to evaluating like how do I take this other random video or technique or article and know whether I can use that in my own trees?
Yeah. That's actually a pretty profound statement. I hadn't thought of that before. And I think that concept of you can't learn bonsai in isolated snippets. You have to learn it in the context of a framework. I hadn't thought much about that, but I think that really is very true. And I think when I look back on my journey, that's why I initially gravitated, I think, to Bonsai Mirai and the content that was out there, like the BSOP Fundamentals videos. I think one of my favorite things about Ryan is he's able to take these, pretty, like, lots of variables and complex ideas and kind of give you a framework. I think of it like gravity or something like that. Isaac Newton said here's the physical principles, and those ended up not being fully correct, right? It's like, oh, well, then we went to the next paradigm, which was, relativity with Einstein or whatever, right? So there's like these phases of these paradigms. But what I like about Ryan's approach is there is a framework that he's putting forward, and, is it 100% correct and everything's exactly accurate and that represents 100% exactly what's going on within the plant? No, but I think having a framework, regardless of whose framework you rely on, in which to start understanding bonsai and making some decisions, I think that's a powerful catalyst for improving at bonsai. I don't know if you would agree or what your thoughts are on that.
I do agree. And I think there's a few reasons why Mirai as a resource, I feel, has been incredible for me personally. And it starts with, the free like BSOP series was one of the first pieces of content I came across that really helped me understand like the systems at play. And that was really when I started to connect bonsai back to my sort of pursuit for creative expression in terms of like, this is something that I can actually get good at. Because my frustrations with a lot of those other like artistic mediums that I had explored was in how much like art skills you need. Like, I don't know, it sounds so redundant, but I felt like in music, like not having like rhythm and tempo and feeling, like not having this like innate talent, I felt was really bottlenecking me. And so maybe that's what I'm really trying to say is that it felt like with a lot of the musical artistic expressions, or even like drawing, which is something that I've played around with, I feel like there is a need for a lot of innate talent, and I didn't have the right kind of talent for those pursuits. But with bonsai, like my innate talent really stems a lot from like STEM background and the STEM like upbringing that I have. Like my bachelor's degrees in engineering, I've got a lot of background in math and science. Being presented with bonsai as a question of not of like innate artistic talent and innate ability to understand design. Okay, if you ask my wife, like, do I have a good like eye for design? And she will first laugh and then like very gently say, kind of, okay. But the answer is no, I don't. But having this framework of how to pursue bonsai that is not as much about innate talent as it is understanding these systems and understanding like the plant's physiology, the horticulture as the underpinning of what you want to pursue creatively is where it really, really connected with me that like this is something that I could probably be good at and much better at in terms of creative expression than a lot of the other things that I had tried. And so Mirai as a resource, like when I found it and it kind of explained like energy management as a horticultural question, as the backbone for what we really try to do with training these trees into the right shape. And then the paid content within Mirai's platform is just like, here's the fire hose, like drink as much as you can, like as fast as you can. Like, there was no other opportunity to consume that much information for that low cost anywhere. Like, I did a lot of, like bring your own tree workshops. And early on, my experience with those workshops was quite frustrating because I didn't know enough to get that as much out of them as ultimately came to understand like how do you maximize the efficacy of what you're going to get out of like a group workshop. It really comes down to knowing what you want and asking for it. But early on when I would go to these workshops and I would bring this like really unusable material, like material that was not really at the right time or seasonality or stage of development to do anything with. And so then like the professionals that were there were just kind of like stymied, like, okay, this is not the right time of year, the right tree, or the right stage of development to do much here. So like, I left feeling a bit frustrated. And it wasn't until I put all this time into like consuming content, and Mirai's platform has so much content. The amount of content on there is just incredible, and you can really get so deep with the platform. But then I found that I was finally able to like go back to YouTube and now like start to really make some much more informed information in terms of some of the YouTube content creators that I wanted to really prioritize in terms of the quality. I found myself really focused on finding content where I could track the tree over multiple videos. I found this to be super helpful. I actually went and I cataloged every single video on the Mirai platform that's about Japanese maples. And then I created my own index of what the trees in the video are. So I had this list of like 30 videos, and I could see that, video 1, 7, 15, and 18 were about this tree, about a particular tree, and I could see that like videos X, Y, and Z were about another tree. That perspective of watching these educational videos focused on the same tree over time was super informative and really helped even further cement what it looks like to develop a tree from very rough raw material to finished and presentable bonsai. So like tracking content, whether it's on YouTube or on Mirai, like that's focused on the same tree over multiple videos, I found to be super helpful. And just really paying attention to the timestamp of anything that I watch, like super helpful, and something that I didn't start doing until like later on. But seeing like what time of year was this video posted, what region is the maker like living in, all that was ultimately stuff that I learned over time that has made it a lot easier to navigate now. But early on, I was really had no idea.
A lot of interesting things in there. One thing I want to go back to is you talked about bonsai as a you want this artistic expression, this outlet for artistic expression, and you saw bonsai as something with a, maybe I'd say like a lower innate talent barrier to entry, if that makes sense. I think we should explore that a little bit more and see like, is that true? Is that not true? I definitely, I don't have a fully formed opinion here yet, but as someone also with a STEM background, I definitely relate to the aspect of there is a lot of like, I guess, science or like a scientific method-based approach that you can take up to bonsai that meshes really well with like how you would learn how to solve a problem in engineering school or something like that, right? But like with guitar, for example, like, and I think also with bonsai, you do have to put in the hours of like, maybe not to grow a tree necessarily, but to, prune it correctly, to wire it. Like there are things within bonsai, and like with guitar, obviously you just need to like, do the chords and, learn how to play. That takes a lot of hours to get that muscle memory. So I'm curious whether you think there isn't that barrier in bonsai, or maybe you just haven't hit that barrier yet in bonsai. I'm curious on your thoughts on that, or whether that barrier is important or not important in bonsai.
So maybe I need to think through this a little bit more, but ultimately I don't think that what I feel like creating super high quality bonsai requires a lower level of artistic talent. I don't think that's what I was trying to say. I think there's an incredible amount of artistic talent in some of the people that I look up to the most and that have inspired me. What I was really connecting with was that the ability, like, I don't know that I'm ever going to get to that skill, because ultimately I feel like eventually I am going to like find that wall of artistic barrier of like creative expression that I found in some of these other explorations. Maybe I will find that wall, but at least with bonsai, the fundamentals are so heavily grounded in things that I can relate to that I feel like I can grasp and really like own the fundamentals of the horticulture and of the concepts of like the fact that you're doing this work on a living plant and that it is a system. So I don't know. There's just a way to think about it that I felt I could connect to and relate to that let me move forward in a way that I found a big hurdle with anything rhythmic. Okay, anything rhythmic was very challenging for me to like move forward with, and it was very frustrating because I really wanted to be good. I just I don't know. It's like one of those like left brain right brain things. But anytime that I had to like do something artistic that involved like singing or dancing or playing an instrument, I would become out of step and out of tune and out of rhythm like immediately, and I just couldn't keep track of it. And if I did try to keep track of it, I would like lock up and like become so hyper focused on counting the timing that I couldn't do anything else. So there's just something about it that was challenging for me, that I've not experienced anything like that with bonsai, with learning the techniques, learning the art, learning from the various professionals that I've worked with. And maybe I will find that at some point, but at least so far that hasn't been the case. But with that caveat that like I can see and appreciate like how much artistic components are involved and how much I've learned, like even just very simple like color wheel concepts are things that would never have come to me naturally, right? Like which colors synergize, which colors are like out of harmony with each other and create tension when you put them side by side. You might think it would be obvious that like purple and green are I think those are like harmonious colors, but like red and yellow are I mean maybe harmonious is not the right word, but it looks good. Like it looks good to have red and yellow together.
Complementary versus opposite versus analogous.
So none of that was natural for me, and so I feel like like there's going to be a ton of like artistic and design and aesthetic concepts that I'm going to ultimately bump up against, and we'll see if I can hopefully conquer that as a challenge of development in my own skills.
Yeah, it makes sense. When you look at bonsai, to like water and prune a tree, which are kind of things that you would typically do at the initial stages, there's not a great like physical inhibition, right? Like you don't, it's a pretty low bar to water a tree and to prune it. Not saying that it's easy to know what decisions to make, but like physically, those are things that are fairly accessible. Whereas to be able to strum a guitar and put your fingers down on these specific fretboards, for example, could be slightly different. Or like to be able to sing, for example, like there's some innate quality to your voice that you definitely can grow and improve, but that can be kind of punishing in the very initial phases. Whereas with bonsai, those initial phases are fairly, like from a physical standpoint, pretty, the barrier to entry isn't too high, right?
Yeah, and I would say there's at least like a really nice feedback loop as a beginner where it's like you're just seeing a plant grow, and that is so exciting, at least for me. Like just simply seeing my plants grow has been so rewarding that like in part I'm like I don't even really care all that much that like I'm growing like these super young and immature and unimpressive trees, like, but I'm just seeing them grow and I'm seeing them like change over the seasons, and it's incredibly positive feedback for me that is rewarding and keeps me super engaged in bonsai as a pursuit. I will say that I have struggled a little bit with the like failure in bonsai, and not so much in terms of like did a tree die or something, but just in terms of the ability to design trees, to like watch a styling video and try to apply those concepts on trees that I have and be left with something where I feel like this does not look good at all. And like I came up super short, and I start to feel like super just overwhelmed of like, oh my God, I did a really, really poor job here. And I start to like get stressed out, and it's been a little bit of a challenge. I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about whether that's relatable, whether like, your attempts to learn bonsai design come with a lot of struggle. And I'm curious if that's a relatable experience for others. Like, at least for me, I've had horticultural failures, and that also leaves a strong impression, but the design failures have been more challenging to like reconcile and move past, because it's like this is just me trying to like practice and apply this technique, and like I learn and I have somebody very experienced show me how to do it, and then I go home and I apply it to my trees, and the outcome is very disappointing. I don't know if you could relate to that.
100%. I would say actually, so I've been thinking of bonsai in these like 4 pillars, right? Horticulture, technique, aesthetic, and like this time or habit related pillar, right? And for me personally, I most relate to like the horticulture and technique pillars, right? I'm like, oh, those are my innate talents or strengths that I think of it. And then the artistic component and maybe the like discipline/time component are areas of improvement, right? And so to me, how you've described your journey sounds very similar to how I think of myself. So like that artistic component is very difficult for me. A very concrete example is like I will style a tree and then I'll take a step back and I look at my checklist of like artistic things that I need to check off, right, to have a good design. And I'll go, wow, like the first step is the branch angles need to be the same across the tree. And then I look at what I like just intuitively did when I was kind of like, looking close in, and the branch angles aren't the same. So even like my first checklist item of a good design, I haven't succeeded at doing that. I'm able to then like correct that and improve it, right? But 100% relate to the or like how I think of it, at least for myself, is like, hey, this artistic component I might not have the best intuition for, and so I need to really be cognizant of how to improve at that area and like really push myself to improve at that area over time. And I'd say that for me, like styling has improved. I'm not where I want to be yet, absolutely not. And I'm not where I've seen other people get to faster than I've been, right? So I don't think I have like that innate spark necessarily, but I have seen myself improve over time, especially as I've just gone and done more stylings. Like each one, I feel like I'm improving. And each one at least gives me more questions to ask someone that I think can, like a teacher that I think can connect with me enough to, like in the right way in which I can drive myself forward. So I would say 100% that challenge is relatable. I think it's probably relatable to a lot of people. I'm curious for folks on the call. But the fact that you're even hitting that barrier means that you're on the right path, I think, to improving.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. And in those moments, I've really tried to hit, like, there's one phrase that helps me hit the reset button when I'm looking at something that I've tried to do with a tree and like kind of reaching a real low of what have I done. So I've fallen back a lot to this idea that I've learned from Michael Hagedorn, which is to like always try to put good information into the tree. And I think I've heard Andrew Robson say this a lot, which makes sense. He learned there, and I feel like that has been a really good sort of fallback, like reset button kind of concept for me to say, okay, I tried to style this tree and it's a mess. It doesn't look very good, and like, okay, what can I do now just to like put some good information? And then it's like going back to what you said, like, okay, are the branch angles set in a way that's consistent, and does the tree have hierarchy? So what that information actually is, I guess, varies a lot, and it's very super contextual, but it has helped me kind of bounce back a little bit and say, okay, that didn't go very well. Let's just start from right now today. Like, what can I do to put good information in the tree? Sometimes it's really just the only thing I can do is just try to go back to like taking good care of it horticulturally. And right now, that's about all I can offer the tree, as far as technique goes, is like, let me just take care of it and I'll come back with some good information at some point.
Yeah. As someone who's maybe like 2 seasons down the line of what you're experiencing now, I would say that first styling that I did on that juniper, I wasn't happy with. The second one, I was like, oh, that's getting better. The third one, now that I have like 3 years of those experiences of styling trees, like I'm even more happy with. So definitely that like put good information in and like see the styling of the tree as a journey, I think is good insight or something to keep in mind, right? That can hurt if you have like a very perfectionist mindset. It's like, why doesn't my tree look as good in the first styling as Ryan Neal's, right? Or like, why doesn't mine look like a piece of art during that first exhibition as I've seen other people be able to do, right? And my goal is just get better each time so that eventually you'll get there. I have seen people who I think have strengths on, or like maybe they are more innately gifted on that artistic aspect. And I was talking with Matthew Galasio recently on the podcast, and he said he approaches trees and design from the mindset of like, does this aspect of the design bring joy? And that's something that I'd never kind of stepped back and thought about while I was doing a design, right? It was very much like, oh, this branch is on this side of the tree, it has to be here. Yeah, that's something that I'm going to try to, jury's still out on whether that helps me be more artistic or not. But that's something I'm going to try to keep in mind and like try to step back and really think about as I'm making some of these decisions in the tree, as I style things going forward. So I'll report back on whether or not that specific advice is helpful for me. But it really struck me as like, oh, maybe I'm not, like maybe I need to rein my natural tendency or like brain in a little bit and take a different approach to my actual thought processes as I'm styling if I want to improve that muscle. So maybe there is a purely like 100% logic based way to arrive at the best design, and I'm going to keep pursuing that process too. But
I do also really like that advice. I think, like for me, the kinds of trees that I've most heavily gravitated towards have been Japanese maples, and what brings me joy with Japanese maples is the seasonality. The change, the color, and the aesthetics over the course of the season has just been so exciting. Like I didn't realize that Japanese maples have unique color in every single season. And I've come to learn and understand that the peak of technique, of bonsai technique for these deciduous trees is the winter silhouette. And that's where you see like most of the really high-end shows are showcasing these trees with this incredible ramification and twigginess. But going back to like what you just said, like what really brings me joy is not as much the winter silhouette as it is the color and the seasonality in spring, summer, and fall. And so, like, yes, I am going to be working on trying to learn those techniques that can create that beautiful winter silhouette. But I feel like in parallel, I'm definitely going to be working on trees that my goal is to maximize the aesthetics in each of the seasons of color. So I want Japanese maples where I can showcase the spring color, the summer color, the fall color. I want to think about like pots and design, tree design that's unique with those different goals in mind. And that's what really brings me joy is seeing that color change and that progression. And so it's a little bit, I think, maybe unusual to design and develop your trees for like spring color. I don't know, like I know like people generally it's probably just a fool's errand given how hard it is to have your trees looking good in the spring in terms of like that super vigorous growth. But anyways, that's something that I like the idea of and the permission to kind of go with what makes you happy, even if it's a little bit different than what maybe is the most common.
Yeah, there's often that struggle between, well, I think the only challenging thing with doing your own thing is that people might disregard you because you haven't shown what's good within the meta, right, or the common goal. So I'm curious, does that play a factor in, like, I mean, it seems like you're getting teaching from very accomplished and traditional and credentialed people, so I'm imagining you're learning the tradition, but then you also have a desire, it sounds like, to innovate upon that in the future too.
I think it is a challenge, and I think it's one of those opportunities to really explore my own creative expression. And kind of what I've been going back to is like at some point I'm going to have to find a way to say something that isn't modeling like an established pattern for how to grow and develop these trees to make them look impressive. And so yeah, I think it'll be fun, right? That'll be part of like one of the more challenging and like opportunities to like set my own
fulfilling, yeah,
approach to some degree. But I acknowledge like a long way to go in that front, and certainly I want to learn from. I mean, there's a lot of people that I've connected with in terms of like seeing them express some of those like sort of core ideas that I relate to, which is like beauty and refinement, elegance in the shape and design of the tree that is, I think, super compelling and part of like what I'm trying to do with my garden.
Makes sense. So given that, can you tell us a little bit about what your goals are for your garden? You've kind of touched on a few of them, but in your practice, I'd love to hear if you have some kind of higher level summary of your goals in bonsai right now, at least. And maybe we'll talk again in the future and we'll see if those have changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest goal I have is the one that I've already shared, which is like I want to find a way to think about some of the ideas that I have that are not specific to nature, ideas about society and community and humanity and like just life. I want to find a way to express some of those ideas using bonsai as a vehicle. That honestly is my most significant goal and what I feel like I'm putting a lot of my energy in towards. Beyond that though, I certainly want to develop nice trees and I want to develop a lot of different kinds of trees. I mean, I don't know if maybe that goal is going to stick, but certainly that's been very compelling for me early on, is exploring the variety of trees that work as bonsai, and exploring like how much you can do design wise with the range of broadleaf evergreens and deciduous and fruiting and flowering, and even with coniferous trees. Like there's so much across the spectrum of trees that work for bonsai that we can do that varies in terms of like design and aesthetic and feel and vibe, and like just like invoking ideas. And so that variety is definitely like part of my goal, is to like develop trees from a number of different species. And so I'm super focused on Japanese maples, but I have a lot of other deciduous trees, and I certainly want to like build them all up and get them to a place where I can use like any of those trees as part of this pursuit to like have creative expression. I think, to be honest, another part of my goals would be to apply some of the things that I do professionally, in terms of like I work and do a lot of teaching professionally. And I would love to bring that into bonsai. I have a lot of ideas about how to communicate what I've learned, how to like synthesize it in a way that I would consider relatable. This is something that I do a little bit professionally as well, is like I create like presentations and trainings and seminars about technology products and how people learn how to use them. And I kind of really like the idea of trying to apply this skill set of teaching to bonsai as well. I've been thinking about bonsai as a video game, because this idea.
No way, that sounds very interesting.
I don't know if it would actually work, okay, but this idea that a bonsai tree has like an HP bar, right? And that HP bar like represents how much energy the tree has, and that it's like a factor of its life, its long-term existence, but also its seasonal existence, and the things that you're trying to do to it. I don't know. I've played around with a lot of different like ways of simplifying the educational aspect of learning bonsai, and the video game concept is very, it's like it's not even half baked, it's like 1/10 baked. Anyways, that's another sort of possible goal, like is to just share what I've learned and share it in a way that could eventually hopefully be relatable and accessible to a lot of people.
Very cool. Yeah, I've been thinking a little bit about like what types of, this is going to get me in trouble, but what types of AI assistance would be helpful within bonsai.
Well, it won't get you in trouble with me. I to be honest, I've found a lot of value and maybe a little bit of caution, but I found a lot of value in using AI to answer horticultural questions. And like if you look at the list of prompts of questions that I've asked my bonsai advisor AI, it would certainly make you laugh. I'll hold up my phone and I'll dictate like a 45-second long question, and whether or not the information I'm getting back is good is certainly a question that I wouldn't necessarily attempt to answer, but it's still helpful for me as a tool, as a resource, and as long as you like understand its limits and understand what you're actually getting back, I think it's a very helpful and very powerful tool.
Yeah, I mean, even just something like having the ability to do image searches, like, hey, I have this tree, can you show me 15 other tree or like 5 other trees that potentially be like design inspiration for this, right? So having some index of styled trees and of high quality photos, and then being able to get inspiration, right? Because today it's like I can't like really, it's hard, it's not super easy to go, oh, I have a juniper that looks like this, and maybe you don't know how to describe what this is. Like, oh, it's an informal upright, but the branches are here and here. It would be really cool to be able to get some assistance, I think, with that initial design concept and inspiration, right? Even something simple like that could be an interesting tool to have within the bonsai ecosystem for doing the art aspect.
I mean, I would be your first subscriber if you put an AI service out there like that. I work in technology, so obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I think there's a lot of potential, and I'd be happy to do a separate podcast on the opportunities of using AI in a way that's like responsible and that's effective and controlled for like high quality and can help us all, because I think that there's an opportunity there.
100%. Yeah, we should do a separate episode on that. That'd be really interesting. To close out this one, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what do you think has been the most effective investment of time for you in your learning so far? And what do you think has been the most effective investment of capital?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say, like, the number one skill as a beginner that it's worth trying to learn is watering. I mean, it's a little bit biased given that I feel like the first tree that I lost was watering error. But even like a year into it now, I'm looking back at trees that I think have been slowed down heavily by watering technique. And so it's not really answering your question, to be honest. Like, what's the number one thing to invest in?
Well, then how did you learn watering, I guess would be the question then, the corollary to your statement.
Yeah, I don't know like when I felt like I really turned the corner. Like at some point I felt like I started to see the soil drying up and started to like understand that that's what I'm looking for is the particles looking dry. And so, I think like in terms of learning watering, like you really have to know like what your soil is and what it looks like when it's dry and what it looks like when it's saturated and make sure that you are like trying to allow it to really dry out regularly in between waterings. So it took me a lot of time and it wasn't something that I really absorbed early on. It's like how important it is and how like everything health related really stems from like how much you understand how to water your trees. There's so much of the health issues like in terms of like just is your tree going to be healthy and growing is like sources from that. And so I would just leave that as something worth investing in through practice or trial and error, but or even just through more reflective and thoughtfulness. Like it may have just been that I didn't really understand how much I should be thinking about watering early on. But in terms of the actual question, like what was the best investment? I think it changes. It's changed a lot. And so there have been things I've done in the last 3 months that I've felt like have been like incredibly valuable, like return on investment. But early on, I think a subscription to the Mirai platform was honestly like I just don't see how you could beat it, right? It costs $30 for 1 month of access to the entire library. I'm not, getting anything. This is not a
Sign up with my
viral
affiliate
guerrilla
link.
marketing
Yeah.
scheme by any means, but for $30 to get access to that much content and to be able to like go in there, choose a tree, and then watch every video that's been made about that tree over the course of 4 or 5 years. Choose a tree that you can just see like from the raw material to the finished product. This is what that looks like. Incredibly valuable. And maybe it's not through Mirai, but any platform or product or book, like there's a manual that I got and I had to order it and have it shipped from overseas. Okay, but it's called Bonsai Maples, and it's a really sort of deep and technical manual on how to develop maples as bonsai, but it has the development from raw source material, raw nursery material, or seed grown material to finished bonsai. Like anything you can do that can show you that entire journey and give you good knowledge about how to get from A to B, from start to finish, is going to be super valuable. I found that the Mirai platform had a lot of that, and it was super worthwhile, compared to in-person workshops and in-person like trainings or like, opportunities to learn from professionals. You're not ever going to get the full picture. You're going to get like this point in time, this is what you do for this tree right now. And you'll get a little bit of opportunity to talk about what the next, 6 months or a year might look like. And early on, that just wasn't something that I was in a good position to take advantage of that opportunity because I didn't have enough context of the entire process. So I would say those two resources were incredibly useful for me, which was like doing the Mirai platform and getting the Bonsai Maples book. Specifically, I would list those because it shows you the start, the finish, and the journey along the way, and you have that opportunity to like consume the entire journey, which is super helpful and super informative.
Yeah. I almost think of that's something I struggled a ton with, and I think that's why I never progressed in the beginning, is because I wasn't thinking of bonsai in the concept of a framework that happens over time. And because I feel like that there's some intuition or sense to bonsai development that comes with, I guess, developing that framework or like getting really good concrete examples of what happens at each of these stages. I kind of think of it like spatial awareness in your brain. Like, can you, twist an apple around in your head? That's not relevant to this specifically, but it's the same kind of thing where it's like you have to develop this sense almost for doing bonsai over time that, you may or may not be innately strong at, right? But it's something you can develop. I don't know that that's something that people innately have, to like be able to visualize the path of a tree over time given the actions we do in bonsai, because it's such a niche thing, right? So whatever you can do to start training that sense early, I think will help you improve a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I was flying to visit my family at home over the summer. So it's a 6 hour flight from California to Miami. And on the duration of that flight, I just brought some blank sheets of paper, some graph paper, and I said, okay, I'm just going to like spend some time trying to draw what a branch of one of my trees is going to look like every like 6 weeks of this year. And I just like I took my phone out and I drew the branch. I traced it off my phone onto this graph paper, and then I just said, okay, 6 weeks from now, this is what that branch is going to look like, and then this is what I'm going to do to it. And I just kept going. And it actually, so the 6 hour flight just like flew by. It took me the whole 6 hours. I barely finished like the one growing season of like projecting or forecasting like what this branch is going to look like. I found it to be like a super helpful and interesting exercise. Kind of hard to do, but fun. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that I would suggest people do, but I agree with your point that like the ability to visualize the development of the tree, the aging process, and the techniques you're going to apply over that time like horizon is super worth investing in and building as a skill, as a bonsai skill.
Yeah, I think that's an untapped area of learning. Like, I think the best thing that we have for that is like somebody will come back and do a video on a tree that they did before, because it's impossible
Right.
to showcase all the different seasons of work at a single time, right? Especially on a single tree. There could be like a gamification, like a way to create a game that helps highlight these skills and knowledge. I think the other challenge is, okay, you did that on a maple, now do that on a juniper, now do that on a Korean
Every
hornbeam, now do
single
that on a tropical, right? So there's like infinite,
species is different,
yeah.
grows different, has different techniques. Yeah, that's been part of what's been so fun is like, but a little bit daunting, to be honest. Super fun, but also like a little bit overwhelming is like, I put all this time, this energy into like really getting my head around how to develop a maple tree. And then I look over at my Hinoki cypress and I'm like, I have no idea what to do with you.
Yeah, exactly. I found that initially when I started my collection, I had one of everything. And I connect with your desire to, have a broad education. But I found that whenever I wanted to push my juniper to like the highest levels that I'm seeing in Japan, for example, like it's just a lot of information to hold in your brain, that kind of level of depth across a lot of species, especially as a hobbyist, where it's like you're not working on thousands and thousands of trees a year or tens of thousands of hours or whatever, or thousands of hours a year. I'm changing my practice a little bit in the last year, and we'll see whether it's successful or not, to kind of focus in a little bit more acutely on something like maples, or in my case, like Itoigawa junipers, and see if I can kind of drive to that level of detail that I want to get to, because there's just so much nuance in like the life cycle of like start to refinement, and like it changes a lot, right? And I want to make sure that that pad that I set in the first styling is on the path to become the pad that I want to see in the Kokofu exhibit or whatever, right? So yeah, I love. We'll definitely chat more in the future. Any final thoughts that you want to kind of share before we wrap?
Well, I just kind of picked up on the last thing you said, which was having the variety and having a certain quantity of trees. Because I have heard this as like advice to beginners, like don't have too many trees. And I've heard a lot of people talk about like don't have bad trees. Like really try to make your collection like high quality and focused in terms of quality and in terms of species. And to be honest, I've really struggled with that. I've really found that challenging. It's not my instincts, and it's also not something that I'm sure if I really like agree with yet. And I feel like maybe I will eventually agree with it, but at least at this point, I want to have a lot of trees, and I've found it valuable to have a lot of trees, and I found it valuable to have trees that are not on a path to becoming a show quality tree. Like I have trees that are ultimately going to, like, they started out simple, they're going to finish pretty simple, but they're still like giving me, I'm still learning from them. I'm still learning things and using them to learn and develop my own like skills. And so I don't know if I have anything like really decisive to say. Just as a sort of a comment on this idea of like what is the right point to like focus and hone in your collection. I think we all can relate to this place that we start where you just buy everything. I don't know. That's certainly been part of my journey, is like literally just buying everything in sight and telling my wife I'm going to air layer every single thing in sight, and I'm taking cuttings of every single tree that I trim and prune. But when do you really start to dial that in is something that I'm still kind of struggling with and thinking a lot about. And I'm not quite ready to dial it in yet. And I see how it can eventually become important to do that. And I appreciate that, like, if I ever want to maintain more than one refined Japanese maple, like, I am going to have to dial it in. Like, the amount of time that takes is incredibly demanding. But at least for now, at least where I'm at now, I'm finding it to be very rewarding and a source of a lot of good knowledge to have bad trees and to have a lot of trees, which I feel like is kind of contrary to a lot of advice I've heard.
No, I mean, I think Jeff in the first episode said something like, have multiple of the same trees so you can compare and contrast like what's happening to them, so you can get more experience and reps. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think for me, I switched some of my goals later in the hobby to having like show quality trees, and I only have a certain amount of space and I only have a certain amount of time. And so that Lowe's Home Depot juniper, that 5-gallon juniper or whatever that I bought early in my practice, like that was invaluable for me as like a healthy, like low cost way to get reps in on styling and stuff like that. If I want to get my trees in a show, then if I only have space for one tree, and it can be a Home Depot tree or it can be, a tree with the capability, like the trunk quality to get into the expo in whatever years, then you kind of need to make that shift. It depends on what your goals are within the hobby, right? And it depends on how much time you have and how much space you have, right? But eventually you run into those constraints, and then that will kind of guide you, and your goals at the time will guide you, right? But I think having a lot of trees is definitely better for your practice because you have more hands-on reps where you're the owner of the outcomes, right? So
yeah, it's good to hear, and I agree completely. Like, space is obviously going to be a huge constraint. So I think the question is more so like, if you had unlimited space, what is the right amount of trees for a beginner to take on? Not something we have to answer now, but I think worth pondering. It's certainly something that I've been considering. I don't have unlimited space, but I have enough to overwhelm myself.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I've been thinking about, is like, okay, have I acquired too many trees? I have like 100 or so now. What's the right amount, and when is the right time to start moving down from that to something more specialized? Yeah,
that's a great question. Well, I think maybe you like growing stuff more than refining stuff, right? And that's perfectly a good way to enjoy the hobby, right? So you can do that. I think probably the answer is, as a beginner, the optimal path would be have as many trees as you can, like fill up your space as quickly as possible, potentially. But the downside is like you might be filling it with low quality things that you learn better in the future. So I don't know. That's definitely something to dive into, I think, in the future. Yeah. That's a really interesting topic to think about. Like, what would the recommendation be for a beginner in an optimal scenario? I think you're a case for, you're a data point for, you dove in super deep really quickly and filled your space very quickly, and you've learned really quickly. So, how much of that is attributed to the number of trees that you got? I don't know, but cool. All right. Thank you so much, Nick. Is there a place that folks can connect with you, or any shout outs you want to make?
I'm on Instagram, so you can connect with me there. I'm Nick Vila 19. And I guess like shout outs, I've learned so much from working with Jonas Dupuis, and volunteering at the expo and volunteering with him has been like super incredible. And I learned so much working at the Bonsai Garden at Lake Merritt. It's a really awesome garden. It's a community space, public collection, two places that have already like really gotten to be places that are very important to me and good opportunities for me. So I'll mention them, but otherwise. Yeah, if folks want to chat with me, definitely feel free to reach out on Instagram, and I'm happy to talk bonsai pretty much anytime.
Awesome. This was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed, and I felt like definitely expanded my mindset this conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time. Looking forward to having more conversations on the podcast and off the podcast in the future. And for everybody online, feel free to message me as well at Teeny Trees on Instagram. I would love to hear which parts of this you related with, which parts contrasted or aligned with your start in bonsai. I think there was a lot of great learnings for folks here. So curious to hear from you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Addison. Bye.